Jonathan Frakes' career took an unexpected turn when he played Commander Riker in Star Trek. He was immediately banned by Hollywood after his film Thunderbirds failed in 2004. Studios ceased phoning. He had to liquidate his belongings. In order to keep things moving, his wife launched a business. "Movie jail," he said, and vanished from the big screen for almost 20 years. However, the reality of what transpired afterward exposes a comeback tale that Hollywood attempted to hide. On August 19, 1952, Jonathan Frakes was born in a modest Bellefonte, Pennsylvania, hospital. All of the children were born at Bellefonte, but his parents resided at State College. Jonathan used to joke that, in addition to seeing the infant, lecturers from Penn State also paid him a visit. His mother, Doris, was a devoted teacher, and his father, James, was a distinguished English professor, yet Bellefonte had booze stores while State College did not. After Jonathan's father was hired at Lehigh University, the family relocated to Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, when Jonathan was 5 years old. Jonathan and his younger brother Daniel were raised there. Daniel would tragically die in 1997 from pancreatic cancer. Jonathan received a trombone in 4th grade. It was not his choice. His arms were long. However, a lifelong passion of music was sparked by that haphazard decision. Jonathan quickly became enamored with jazz once his father exposed him to it. He became a member of the Liberty High School Grenadier Band, a prominent group in Bethlehem. They took first place in the field and parade contests when they traveled to Florida for the Festival of States in 1970. Even a public thoroughfare was renamed in their honor by the mayor. Jonathan cherished that moment. He said that many came just to see the band's halftime performances because they were superior to the football squad. He enrolled at Penn State as a psychology major after high school. That was short-lived. He was ushering at a theatrical festival one summer when a director invited him to participate in a production. Jonathan switched to theatrical arts as his major right away after noticing how much fun the performers were having. Though it altered his life, he subsequently remarked that a degree in theater might not be the most useful. He joined the Penn State Thespians, performed often, and slept very little. However, he adored it. Jonathan attended Harvard for additional training after receiving his BFA in 1974. He enrolled in the professional acting training at the Loeb Drama Center and worked with actual theatrical groups over the summers. According to him, students may be employed there to complete the cast. He learnt a lot from the more seasoned actors and directors around him, and it was a serious job. He had the skills he would need to become a professional thanks to that combination of discipline and practical experience. In 1974, Jonathan Frakes received his Penn State Theatrical Arts degree. Like hundreds of other aspirational performers, he packed up and relocated to New York City in pursuit of a dream. New York, however, made things difficult. He carried furniture, waited tables, and once had a back injury while doing so. He took minor parts with the inconceivable Ragtime Theater and even appeared in The Hairy Ape, directed by Eugene O'Neill. He eventually made his Broadway debut with the musical Shenandoah in 1976. However, posing as Captain America for Marvel Comics and making appearances at conventions was one of his more peculiar occupations. Although it wasn't glamorous, it taught him how to handle admirers, a skill that would be useful years later. His first significant break came in 1977. He was cast as Tom Carroll, a Vietnam veteran, in the NBC soap series The Doctors. For a time, it provided him with a consistent salary. However, the post was short-lived. His agency advised him to try Los Angeles once his role was written out. He so packed up and relocated to the West in 1978. Things began to gradually shift at that point. Although he didn't become famous right away, Louisiana gave him more TV possibilities. He made appearances as a guest star on popular television programs such as The Dukes of Hazzard, Charlie's Angels, Fantasy Island, The Waltons, Quincy, and M.E. Even though they weren't major parts, they helped him establish his reputation. One audition at a time, he was proving himself, learning the ropes, and showing up. He was cast in the television film Beach Patrol in 1979. The plan was to use it as a pilot for a new program, but it never materialized. one another dead end. Big names like Aaron Spelling produced the movie, and he co-starred with Robin Strand and Christy Delisle, but even they were unable to salvage it. Frakes, like many Hollywood actors, was caught up in the never-picked-up cycle of pilots. The big break still seemed far off, but he continued to work. Then in 1983, he believed he had finally discovered it. Based on a successful miniseries, NBC placed him in the primetime soap opera Bare Essence. The crowd didn't care, and the concert was terminated shortly after it began, despite the enormous chance. Another failure. However, it produced a positive outcome this time. He met Jeannie Francis on that set. They didn't click at first. He even made a joke about her hair, but they weren't quite finished with fate. They reconnected on the set of the huge Civil War miniseries North and South in 1985, 2 years later. This time, after 6 months of filming around the southern United States, something snapped. The next significant phase of Frakes' career began with the beginning of their relationship. Frakes was a standout as Stanley Hazard, and North and South was a success. At last, people were taking notice of him. Then 1987 arrived. Encouraged by Jeannie and her family, Frakes went to try out for a new science fiction program. After 7 auditions in 6 weeks, he was eventually cast. On Star Trek: The Next Generation, he was chosen to play Commander William Riker. Everything changed at this point. This was the result of years of hardship, cancelled series, and lost pilots. Additionally, his filming schedule forced him and Jeannie to postpone their wedding thrice, despite their engagement. However, they succeeded. They were married on May 28, 1988, during the first break of the show. Jonathan Frakes, however, was not the most likely option to portray Commander William Riker in 1987. He had to struggle to get it. Jeffrey Combs, Michael O'Gorman, or even Billy Campbell may have played the part. Star Trek founder Gene Roddenberry stepped in when the studio was leaning toward someone else. Frakes reminded him of himself, perhaps even of himself. He didn't simply support him in silence. He called. Frakes got the component when he gave it a firm shove. Years later, Frakes acknowledged that Roddenberry recognized some, if not all, of himself in Riker. Once on the program, Frakes unintentionally invented the Riker move, which went on to become a legend. It was never intended to be a stylish move. The set seats were awkwardly low. He just slung his leg over his back in place of sitting correctly. It seems daring, perhaps too daring. Fans adored it, even if Frakes subsequently quipped that it could have appeared like a jerk move. It came to pass. With a yell of Riker as he climbed a horse, Jack Quaid even imitated it on the lower decks. Another Riker move, this one more related to war tactics, may be found in Insurrection. Something unexpected happened when the Best of Both Worlds broadcast. As Riker, Jonathan Frakes was more than simply the cool second-in-command. He was looking directly at someone equally as shrewd. Elizabeth Dennehy's character is Commander Shelby. There was a subtle tension throughout their scenes together. Riker gave an eye roll. Shelby exerted more effort. Fans adored it. People were still able to recall the episodes when they were screened in theaters years later. When Shelby pushed Riker on the elevator, someone even screamed, "Reddit girl." It wasn't just a witty line. It demonstrated the strength of their chemistry. The crowd sensed it. Fans began to envision a program in which Shelby was Riker's number one and Riker was the captain. You wondered what may have been. It wasn't only a storyline development. It revealed a new side of Riker, a man who wasn't sure if he was prepared for the large chair. However, Star Trek was not all somber. At one point, Jonathan Frakes revealed something unexpected. Gene Roddenberry told me not to smile. He remarked. That was ridiculous, Frakes remarked. Later he joked about it. After casting me they instructed me not to grin. The reality. There were several jokes on the set. The actors were boisterous, jovial, and always laughing. Brent Spiner, Patrick Stewart, and Frakes also aimed to convey that enthusiasm on screen. The ancient trio was admired. Kirk, Spock, and Bones all want the same spark. You could sense their relationship in every episode as they did more than simply deliver lines. They rolled their eyes, teased one another, and had a good time. Their personas were infused with genuine camaraderie, not simply acting. Jonathan Frakes could tell the producers didn't take him seriously when he initially wanted to direct an episode of Star Trek: The Next Generation. Frakes could see it in the face of the show's executive producer Rick Berman, who refused to say no. He retained that doubtful expression. Thus, rather of arguing verbally once more, Frakes fell silent and got to work. He prepared for months. He participated in casting sessions, spent around 300 hours sitting in editing rooms, and went to every pre-production meeting he could. Then he arrived with a presentation that was 47 pages long. It had everything. He created the storyboards by hand. Character analysis and intricate camera settings led to the paper being dubbed the Riker Directive. And something was different when Berman looked at it at last. Frakes created his own opportunity from the ground up rather than merely asking for a chance. The Offspring, an emotive tale about Data creating an android daughter, was the first episode he directed. It wasn't simple. Frakes had to balance acting and directing while still portraying Commander Riker. Scene after scene, he ran from behind the camera to in front of it while wearing his Starfleet uniform underneath a director's jacket. He put in 18 hours a day. It paid well, although he didn't get any sleep. One of the most acclaimed episodes in the entire series, it aired in March 1990. Frakes wasn't happy with his performance in the show even at that point. In fact, he requested that the editors shorten his sequences. He was so intent on the directing side of things. "I like it more," he replied afterwards. "And I'm more of a director than an actor." However, not everyone immediately trusted him. His co-stars weren't sure how to respond when one of them made the decisions. In public, Patrick Stewart was kind, but in private, he doubted that an actor could lead other performers. That first morning Marina Sirtis didn't even meet his gaze. She was concerned that the episode's romance storyline might cause awkwardness. To keep his character safe, Brent Spiner, who portrayed Data, had additional notes ready. Frakes took care of everything. He was not a rank player. He concentrated on his performance. He observed intently. Stewart had a change of heart at the conclusion of the second day. He was laughing again with Sirtis. Spiner stored his notes. The whole ensemble began to understand that Frakes had done something that none of them had done. This was something he had trained for. They were blind to what he referred to as his stealth directing. He would go to the set 90 minutes early for any sequences in which he played Riker in order to set up every perspective. He had prepared shot lists beforehand. He had discussed everything beforehand with the cinematographer. He secluded himself in the editing bay to go over the tape at lunch while the rest of the team took breaks. He wasn't asked to do it, he simply did it. In this way he maintained order without coming across as ostentatious. Additionally, Frakes had a secret weapon when it came to camera work. He would go to the Warp Core, a little pub once shootings were finished, with the show's director of photography, Marvin Rush. Rush would use bar napkins to teach him photography while they sat for hours drinking Macallan 18. Angles, composition, and light placement all took place in between scribbles and beverages. Dozens of the napkins were preserved by Frakes. In his office, 13 are still framed. First contact was already in place when Paramount sought a director for Star Trek. They didn't initially choose him. Well-known people like John McTiernan and Ridley Scott have previously declined. But no one knows Star Trek like Frakes. He was aware of the world, the characters, and the tone. He was so hired by Paramount. After 10 weeks of preparation, Frakes had 12 weeks to shoot. He was accustomed to only 7 days for each phase on television, so this was a significant departure. He watched movies like Jaws, Close Encounters, and 2001 to prepare. An Adventure in Space, even examined the work of Ridley Scott and James Cameron. He was aware of the pressure. This was no longer just television. The invention of the Borg Queen was one significant change. The Borg was initially intended to remain a mindless collective, but Jonathan Dulgan, the head of Paramount, insisted that the movie required a true antagonist, someone who was tangible and with whom the protagonists could interact. The concept of the Borg Queen was created around that time. It was difficult to cast her. They needed someone intriguing, sexy, eerie, and menacing. In Alice Krauth, Frakes discovered that she was a fantastic match for the job. She had wires for hair, pale skin, an uncanny long head, and hours of makeup. The most iconic image from the movie is her entrance sequence, in which her upper torso is lowered and fastened to her spine. ILM completed that picture in 5 months. In First Contact, everything was more significant than television. Once taking an hour, Borg makeup now takes 5. An additional half-hour was spent getting into costume. Remove it, 90 more. They had less than 20 artists, but they required 50. There were more wires, more slime, and more dramatic makeup as the movie progressed. The Borg seemed to be spilling oil. They were frightening because of it. Craig's body was lowered using a rig for the Queen sequence, and she appeared to be floating thanks to a blue outfit and computer effects. It was a daring move that paid off. The First Contact was successful. Fans and critics praised it. It was even dubbed the best-looking Star Trek movie by Patrick Stewart. Frakes went on to become the director of Star Trek: Rebellion. However, there was just one lightning strike. The follow-up wasn't as good. There were conflicting reviews. The narrative seems uninteresting. Even Nemesis, which Frakes did not direct, had some improvements, according to Stewart afterward. The letdown, and Frakes' momentum began to suffer. Thunderbirds followed in 2004, a blockbuster film with high expectations. Its brand was well known. Despite having a good budget, a solid cast, featuring Ben Kingsley and Bill Paxton, the movie was a complete failure. It was ripped up by critics. Viewers avoided it. Later, Frakes said that no one called him again following Thunderbirds. He dubbed it movie jail. He had to make sales. He relocated to Maine after leaving London. In order to keep things moving, his wife launched a business. The reset was difficult. Since then he hasn't directed a feature picture. That was more than 2 decades ago. He didn't give up though. Returned to his familiar surroundings, including Star Trek and television. In addition to other shows like The Librarians, he helmed episodes of the more recent Star Trek series. According to him, television has evolved into a space where anything may happen and no one will notice the director. It was stable but not flashy. On the set of a film, Jonathan Frakes had no intention of falling in love. He was only attempting to carry out his duties on the Civil War miniseries North and South in 1985. At the age of 32, he was hardly known. Then Jeannie Francis arrived. Working with Leslie Ann Down and Patrick Swayze, she was already a celebrity. It was all professional at first. However, something changed during the Charleston and Natchez shoot. They traveled to New Orleans together on a Memorial Day vacation. At that point, everything made sense. It turns out that they had previously met on the set of the short-lived television program Bare Essence. She had seemed too young to Frakes. She was only 20, and he was over 30. However, at the time, the timing was incorrect. They were given another chance by the North and South, and this time it worked. Frakes continues. Somehow she took a chance on me. I don't know why she would go out with me. The date of their marriage was May 28, 1988. 38 years have passed since then. For Hollywood, that's a lifetime. It wasn't necessary for Jeannie to make an appearance in Star Trek. She was already well known in popular culture. She has portrayed Laura Collins on General Hospital since 1977, making appearances in over 890 episodes. She was the larger star when they first met. However, Frakes quickly gained notoriety after joining Star Trek: The Next Generation as Commander Riker. Through it all, they were there for one another. In order to assist her remember those grueling days of filming a soap opera with 30 pages of dialogue, Frakes frequently repeats lines with her. They brought up 2 children. These days, one of them, their daughter Eliza, is acting and writing like them. But despite all of its achievements, Frakes has suffered a significant loss. In 1997, his brother Daniel passed away from pancreatic cancer. He was only 41. It took place a week before to the birth of Frakes' daughter. Daniel was more than a brother, his best buddy was him. Together they had relocated to New York in a dilapidated 1967 Chevy sport van. They had lofty aspirations and little flats in common. Doctors attempted the Whipple technique, a major surgery, after Daniel's diagnosis, but the cancer had progressed too far. They reclosed him. There was no hope, according to the physicians. There may be 6 months remaining. Pancreatic cancer had a 4% survival rate at the time. Even though Frakes was broken, he didn't let his sorrow fester. He has been working with PanCan, the pancreatic enzyme, for the last 25 years. To increase awareness and strive for improved results, join the Cancer Action Network. His objective evolved from a personal to a public one. He formed Trek Against Pancreatic Cancer in 2022 with other Star Trek celebrities. They began walking for a cause alongside John Billingsley, Armin Shimmerman, and 18-year survivor Kitty Swink. They walk in 60 places nationwide as part of the PanCan Purple Stride fundraiser every April 29th. The Santa Monica Pier is where Frakes typically begins his. Tens of thousands have been raised by their team for assistance and research. Things are gradually improving as a result of initiatives like these. From 4% to around 11% to 12%, the survival rate has gradually increased. Better, but still awful. Over the years, PanCan has spent $174 million on research. As part of a record $25 million year, they awarded $10.5 million in research grants in 2022 alone. Frakes is always stressing about early detection, particularly if you have a family history of pancreatic cancer. He is aware of how quickly it might happen. He continues to walk, talk, and appear because of this. Following the 2004 box office failure of Thunderbirds, Jonathan Frakes vanished from the big screen. About $57 million was lost on the film. It was smashed by critics. It was disregarded by audiences. The film industry ignored him. The director of one of the greatest failures of the 2000s was not someone the studios wanted to risk. The director of Short Lists silently forgot his name. He was forced to search elsewhere by 2006. He resumed his work as a television director. Not hits, not glitzy shows. He contributed to the Nickelodeon children's series True Jackson and Zoe 101. He didn't use a false identity. Despite some people's suspicions that he may do so out of embarrassment, he continued to use his given name, even for little tasks. He was slowly regaining his strength. Something changed in 2010. He received a call to direct Castle Los Angeles and NCIS episodes. They were both major network programs. The game once again included his name. He had changed from being a box office failure. He was the one who stayed and continued. At that point he became known as the sci-fi fixer. 17 various science fiction or fantasy series that were either having trouble or were simply attempting to establish their rhythm have been guided by him. He contributed to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., Orphan Black, Warehouse 13, The Librarians, and Roswell. They summoned Frakes when narratives were a jumble and funds were tight. He added organization. He added tempo. He managed to make it work. He had directed more than 100 TV shows by 2016. The whispers began at that moment. He was dubbed the genre whisperer by industry insiders. He achieved accomplishments without being ostentatious or noisy. He was skilled at striking a balance between humor, character, and action in shows that before he came on board, frequently lacked all three. He appeared to be on the verge of a major return in 2018. A revamp of Beyond Belief, Fact or Fiction was approved by CBS. Frakes was slated to direct each episode in addition to serving as host. The former show's fans were thrilled. The team was prepared. Then CBS canceled 3 days prior to production. As simple as that. Creative differences, they stated. It was reminiscent of the past. There had also been issues with the first edition of Beyond Belief. Fox continued to rearrange its programming slots. It had a 2-year break before being scrapped. The reboot was now also dead. Frakes didn't give up before it even began. He revived the show in Germany in 2021. X Factor Das Unfassbare was the name of it. Filming took place in Los Angeles. Once more he served as host. The bizarre stories and the calm voice asking viewers to determine what was true were the same. Despite the nation and network changes,